Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, a resource designed to take your ministry to the next level. Whether you're a seasoned leader or a growing team member, this podcast will sharpen your vision and strengthen your staff and deepen your impact for the gospel. Each week, we bring you honest conversations, practical tools, and insights from the real church leaders who understand the unique joys and challenges of ministry. From worship planning to discipleship and outreach, our goal is to equip and encourage you for the work God has called you to do. I'm your host, Matt Pearson, campus and teaching pastor at the church at West Franklin, one of our Brentwood Baptist campuses. Joining me today is John Joseph, campus and teaching pastor at the church at Station Hill. Before we jump in, I want to let you know about some exclusive resources available on our website. We're sharing team handbooks, ministry guides, and invites to exclusive Zoom calls, all designed to help you lead more effectively. These are available to those subscribed to the Elevate Podcast and Conference. You can sign up for free right now by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting elevatechurchconference.com. Today, I'm very excited to be able to talk about the preaching model of all of our campuses here at Brentwood Baptist Church. I want to start just simply by asking you, John, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
Yeah, excited to be here with you, Matt, and talk about preaching. So my name is John Joseph. I'm the campus and teaching pastor at the church at Station Hill, one of the 9 campuses of Brentwood Baptist Church. I've been in that role for just over a year now. My family and I moved down last January. I was the lead pastor of a church there in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in Maryland. I've been serving in pastoral ministry for just over 11 years now, been preaching for the majority of those 11 years, but have been in a lead teaching pastor type role now for just about seven and a half years. Married to my wife, Leah. We have 4 kids, Jack, Knox, Grace, and Caroline. They are 11, 9, 6, and 4. And I'm just excited to be here with you today to talk all things preaching. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I've been part of Brentwood now for 10 years, the campus and teaching pastor at the church at West Franklin, and I've just enjoyed my time here. So why don't we jump into it? I think it'd probably be good to tell those who are listening or watching about our philosophy, the preaching team philosophy. So you've been here a little over a year. Why don't you just start by telling us kind of what you've observed about our philosophy, what you've learned, what you like about the philosophy of our preaching team?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think starting big picture, without like a textbook definition of what our philosophy is, I would describe it as a mix of expositional preaching, topical preaching, done in a team environment. But since we have 9 campuses, that enables us to contextualize either the book that we're working through or the particular passage that we're preaching on a topic from to our own individual campuses. This is new for me. So my previous ministry and previous preaching role, I was the only preaching pastor. I didn't work on a team per se, though I had people around me. We would talk about the text and things like that. But this has been a really wonderful experience being part of the team here. So all of our campus pastors, getting together once a week in advance of that Sunday to talk through the text and to consider the different ways that we think it's going to apply to our particular congregation. So that's kind of big picture how I would describe our philosophy, a blend of expositional preaching through books of the Bible plus topical preaching where we get to address things that our congregation needs to hear about, and done in a team context where each of our campus pastors is helping to sharpen one another as we're thinking about God's word. Yeah,
that's a great way to put it. Just for our listeners' sake, for those who are watching, we meet every Monday afternoon at 3:30, and we spend an hour talking about the text. We have a research assistant in our context, Paul Wilkerson, who puts together a mammoth of research, a lot of research for us that, God willing, if we have time, we look over before the meeting on Monday and spend some time talking through. And so grateful to have his insight, Paul's insight as well. Yeah. Every year, we usually around May, we get away and lock ourselves in a room for a couple days where we plan out the next year's preaching plan. So all 9 of us, and there's some others in the room as well, we speak into what we're going to be preaching. And so we all have a seat at the table. No one person, Jay or not one person, comes down the mountain and says, here's what you're going to be preaching over the next year. He helps form the vision and some of the things God's put on his heart, but we all get to speak into that. And so we have a voice into what we're preaching, and then when we get together week by week by week, we get to help each other out on and talk about some of the things we're learning and that God is showing us. So
yeah, I've really enjoyed the Monday meetings. It's a great way to start off the week. So you're coming in from Sunday. You know, as a pastor, most pastors, if they preached on Sunday, they're tired, they're run down. Mm-hmm. It's a day for kind of, building your energy back up and prepping for the week. And it's that Monday meeting, just 1 hour with the other campus pastors, where we're sharing briefly about what happened at our campuses on that previous Sunday, and then looking ahead to the Sunday to come. It's a great way to really reset and get kind of in a good mental place where I know where I'm headed this week with the preaching text, and just getting to hear from the other guys and how God's word is speaking to them, how they're thinking about applying it to their congregation. It really just gets the wheels turning, so that once I'm ready later in the week to really get into sermon prep, I've already been thinking a little bit about it. Yeah. And that preaching retreat that you described, getting to be a part of it for the first time this last year in 2024, as we were planning for 2025, was just so insightful and so encouraging. So again, never having been a part of a system like that, I was really, really encouraged that it wasn't the type of thing where one person comes and says, this is what we're preaching next year, and this is what you all are preaching. Like you said, we all got to speak into it, and it really was an open brainstorming session where each of us shared books of the Bible we thought would be useful to preach through, topics that we thought our congregations would need to hear from us on, and then getting time to really whittle down that list and land on something everybody thought that they could get behind. Such an encouraging experience. And pastoral ministry is a lonely place, and I'm sure you've experienced that. So getting to do that together on a team, just such a great experience.
Yeah, it is. And one more thing I'll say about this. I remember when I first was entertaining the idea of coming here 10 years ago. I'd never been a part of anything like this, and a lot of mega churches around the nation were piping in sermons at their campuses from the head guy. And I had a lot of people ask me, "Are you just going to be kind of helping maintain a campus while somebody else preaches?" And I don't think any of us campus pastors would be here if that was the case. And what I love about our model is, yes, we preach the same text. Yes, we speak into it. But as anyone who will listen to any of our sermons on Sunday morning, we are all very, very different. We all bring, we all have, of course, our unique style, but we're all speaking to our people. And so I'm so glad we have that freedom. No one expects us to be a cookie cutter preacher or a cookie cutter approach. There's a lot of different things feeding into it that come from Brentwood and one another. But at the end of the day, we get to preach to our people. Yeah, I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah, amen to that. And I think just like you, so you've been here 10 years, me just over a year. I don't think I would have been open to coming here had it been more of like the traditional mega church style of beaming in or piping in another preacher. I feel so strongly about the necessity of preaching to your congregation, and we're just so glad that was part of the vision here.
John, you shared a little bit of this a moment ago, but it'd be good for us to maybe dive into this more. But how do you think and pray through the text for your campus?
Yeah, it's a great question. Prayer is something I wish I did more of. I'm always discouraged by my prayer life, even as a pastor. But what I try to do is I'll just call it like a popcorn session. So I'm less structured in my prayer approach outside of Sunday morning. Sunday morning, I have a very structured way that I pray before the service. But throughout the week, as I'm preparing and studying, I am constantly trying to think about, Lord, help me to worship you in this moment. Help me to be instructed first by this text before I ever preach it to anyone else. So my prayers first are like, Lord, teach me. I want to preach out of the overflow of what I'm learning from you. But then as I'm preparing the sermon, or studying, I'm just firing off prayers. So this past week, preaching on the preeminence of Jesus Christ, it was a lot of prayers about, Lord, help us to worship Jesus as the image of God. The one in whom the fullness of God dwelled. Help us to recognize, our congregation to recognize that we were made through him and for him. Help us to understand what it looks like to live for him. So I'm just constantly firing off prayers. Sunday morning is a little bit different, where I have a prayer that I pray every Sunday morning from the Valley of Vision.
Oh, yeah.
It's a devotional I've used over the years. And then I pray through each of the services, and I pray through each element of the service. The songs that we're going to sing, the prayers, whoever's involved, and things like that. So that's a bit what it looks like. What about for you?
I don't pray.
Yeah. I just love your honesty here. I never pray, actually.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think I learned some things there. So thank you for that. I see, as I think about the question, think through, pray through the text. A lot of the times, and yes, I definitely want it to impact me and ask the Lord to change me and out of the overflow. I don't know if this is new to me or something I've just kind of been paying attention to more lately, but I've always manuscripted my sermons. I don't know why, but ever since day one, I've just manuscripted.
I'm right there with you.
And I've just now begun to really pay attention to, I say just now, maybe 6 months to a year ago, just really pay attention to it. That when I'm in the study, let's say Wednesday morning for the first time, or really hitting it hard Thursday morning, I've just noticed the Spirit helping me walk through the sermon and the text, opening my minds to insights to perhaps how to apply this to West Franklin. And yeah, 5 years ago, I probably would have said I did that, but now it's just becoming more plain. I'm looking forward to that. Like, okay, Spirit, how are you going to guide me as I guide West Franklin in this text? And then as that happens, using it as a prayer. Okay, God, I pray this fall on their ears, their hearts. You change them as a result. And so I've just really enjoyed that. And when you manuscript, you can kind of pray through those things as you type it, and then Friday morning, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, as you're rereading it and tweaking it, you can just kind of use it as a prayer for the congregation. I may need to borrow the Valley of Vision prayer from you, but I'd like to see that. But one of the things I've done, and I don't know how long I've been doing it, it's kind of cheesy, but every Sunday morning I will read the manuscript, spend some time in a psalm, and then I'll go for a walk, 45-minute walk, and I'll preach it to myself as I'm on the walk. It just kind of helped me think through see if there's any gaps in my thinking, that sort of thing. And when I'm done, I know that if people are looking out their window, they think I'm crazy. But I do this, and I hold like I'm holding up a manuscript, and I'm just ask the Holy Spirit to baptize it with His fire. And I've just been doing that for a long time. Don't know why. I just started doing that a while back, and just something I've started doing. But
it's such a great practice, right?
Yeah.
Because it shows just an obvious recognition of the fact that apart from Him doing anything with it, I don't know if you feel this way, but so I manuscript as well. For me, it's a practice on, if I haven't typed it all out and thought it all out, I'm just going to babble, and I'm not going to say things that are as useful.
Yes.
Some guys are gifted at doing that, and that's just not me. So
Wade
working
can
through
babble a lot.
Working through that whole process is really helpful for me. But it's a way to just to show that apart from God blessing it, because I often look at my manuscripts and I think, this is really not that good. Like this is quite bad actually, and I'm going to need God's help in this. Yeah. But I also love that you're praying through applications, and something I've done as well is just praying through sermon illustrations. Like, Lord, help me think of a way to make this truth come alive.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
It's been really encouraging to see how often he answers, even with small, simple stories that either come to mind or that I encounter as I'm preparing the sermon. So yeah, that prayer is so important. But again, like you, it's just, I'm often thinking I need to be praying more.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, me too. And just hearing you say that is just a reminder to me, and hopefully a reminder to our listeners here, especially preachers. The Spirit loves the church we're preaching to much more than we do.
Yeah, that's
right. He
right.
longs for them to get it, and we are that chosen mouthpiece for that week. And so joining Him in that is unique. So that's good. That's good. Thank you. Let me see. Balancing your preaching voice versus the tone of the series/sermon plan. So how do you do that? How do you balance your preaching voice versus the tone of the series/sermon plan?
Hey, one thing I would say, especially if there are guys who are, maybe earlier on in preaching, this is a really important question for different reasons. I think first off, if you're earlier on in your preaching, you probably don't have a preaching voice yet. You're probably still trying to figure it out. I remember my first sermons, by first I mean 50 to 100, where it's just like I don't know what I sound like up there. Like I don't know if it's me, if I'm coming across like me. I think it's normal for younger preachers to struggle to find their voice, and they may even sound like their favorite preachers for a while as they figure out their voice. That'll come over time. I think it just takes reps for guys to figure out their voice. But the second reason it's important, especially as it relates to your voice versus the tone of the text and the tone of the passage, I think it's common for younger preachers to sound angry or stern. I think young guys can see things clearly, but I think they wrongly have a tendency to assume that everyone they're speaking to is like lukewarm and needs to be like, let's get it in order, people. I don't know about you. I've gone back to listen to some of my earlier sermons.
I would never do.
And I'm just like, dude, what was I thinking? That was terrible.
Yeah.
It sounds so angry and self-righteous and this or that. And the way that gets worked out of you as a preacher, if you're living in close community with the people that you're walking alongside of, you realize, you know what? These people are not lukewarm. They're actually much holier than I am. They're just experiencing life in a fallen world. They're suffering. They're struggling in different ways. And I think life just kind of beats that out of you. And you just learn to be more tender, more gentle, more compassionate, more understanding. But at the same time, I think it's important. One of the things that I've always strived for, and I don't know what you would think about this. I have my own personality. I tend to be excitable on, when I'm preaching, tend to be more passionate, I feel things strongly and want to communicate them strongly. But at the same time, I want my preaching voice every Sunday to match the tone of the text, right? So if I'm preaching a psalm of lament, I don't want to be up there like cheering people on.
Or a bunch of jokes.
Yeah, that's right. Or from Job or something like that. I think you want to strive for your tone on a Sunday to match the tone of the text. And then to also, it's just so important to pastor people and to live among people. Because, and I think you see this in Paul's teaching when he talks about there's going to be doubting saints, there's going to be lazy saints, there's going to be proud saints, there's going to be humble saints, and you need to address them and teach them all differently. And so it's being aware of who are the people in my congregation, what are the different things that they're struggling with and experiencing in life, and how can my tone, be communicated in a way from the text faithfully that meets them where they are in their particular struggle. So just some thoughts on it, but it's still it's still something that I'm working on a regular basis. What about you? What do you think about it?
Well, you said a lot there that was really, really good and helpful. I don't know if I have tons to add. I will say, when I think about our preaching team and the tone of the text and the series that we're doing, there's a lot of times on Monday I'll hear someone give an insight that I'm like, that is gold. That is really good, which is helpful. But if I'm not careful, I will apply what God is saying to them about their congregation and make it try to fit into mine. Sometimes it can, but not all the time. So I have to be careful to be like, dude, that'll preach, and think, okay, how does that?
Will that preach to my congregation?
Yeah.
And it is, you bringing that up is probably helpful for people to know. Like, our campuses are very different from one. Not all of them. Some are more similar to others, but you think of the church at Station Hill and the church at West End probably have some similarities given our geographical proximity to one another. But the church at Lackland Springs and the church at Woodbine, they're going to be dealing with different issues because of where they're located. And so it's so important to make sure what we're thinking about matches our particular congregation.
I would have conversations with David Hanna a lot in this past November, and what he was dealing with his congregation about regarding the election was so far different.
Yeah.
I mean, the opposite extremes, what I was dealing with.
That's
with
right.
my congregation, fears and things like that. And so, I mean, we're not very far apart, but all of our campuses are different. Some are similar, but we're all our own unique campus.
But that preaching team meeting, for instance, on an issue like that you bring up, I still remember when David brought up some of those issues that he was thinking through for the church at Lackland Springs, and that gave me insight into how some people in our congregation might be feeling and thinking about the election.
That's true.
Insight that I was like, oh, you know what? The majority of our congregation might be in a particular place, but
there's a few.
There's probably going to be people who are sharing his sentiments, and that's going to be helpful for me as I pastor the whole congregation.
Yeah, that's good. Has there been a time, John, when you've had to maybe pivot away from the preaching plan, or stay within the preaching plan, but be kind of do your own thing? Has there been a time when you've had to do that?
Yeah, one that I can think of late last year, and this is where I really appreciate the freedom that Jay gives to each of the campuses. If there's, he's gonna want us, and I think we all recognize it's really important to stay with the preaching plan as best as possible. And we can see all sorts of ways that the Spirit uses our preparation and lines up some texts for particular weekends that are just beyond our ability to control. But in terms of pivoting, he also gives freedom to particular campuses if there's a specific need. And one that comes to mind for me where we pivoted away from the preaching plan was we are dealing with space issues at our campus. And one of the things that we were trying to do was maximize space at our 8 a.m. service. We had a lot of seating available there, trying to get people at the 9:30 and 11 o'clock to consider attending that service. And so we used that Sunday. There was a particular text in place already, but I asked Jay if he would consider letting me do more of a vision sermon where I'm trying to help people understand where we've been, how we've grown as a church, and how we're going to move forward and maximize the space that we have to reach as many people in Spring Hill. And he was very gracious, totally understood, even gave some insights because of his own experience at Station Hill on how that could be done well. And so we pivoted away for that Sunday, and it worked really well. People responded great, and we've had better attendance at the 8 a.m., so much better that we have more space at those other two services, and that's been great. So that would be an example of one time where we pivoted away. Yeah. What about you?
I haven't necessarily personally at West Franklin. I know that there's been a time or two when Mike Glenn was still senior pastor. I remember I think at Station Hill there were several deaths in a row of very active church members. And Jay had asked permission to spend a Sunday or two to address that because it affects the whole church. And I don't remember what series we were going through or anything like that. But, if you're going through a vision series, or if you're going through a real happy joyful series, and you've got everybody weighed down with the grief of losing some people. That'd be a miss, and it'd be kind of ministry malpractice, if you will. And so there's been times when that's happened. So I remember Jay asked me to preach at Station Hill the Sunday after he left Station Hill to go to Brentwood, and I was like, "Thanks."
I think I watched that sermon.
Did you?
Yeah, I saw it online later.
Well, it was like we were doing a series on David, and it was the one where he died. David died, and it was over. And I was thinking, I don't know if I want to. I mean,
after Jay leaves, the one who planted the church and had been there for 15 years, and now you're preaching on the death of the king.
Yeah, they're going to feel like that there's already dying going on.
Yeah.
But I remember, and we just. I went ahead and preached it, and I just remember thinking, God knows exactly what he's doing, because that's exactly, I forget the insights or whatever that were there, but I just remember thinking that day, yeah, that's exactly what this church needed to hear. There have been times, well, I can't count the number of times, I should say, that someone or someones have said to me, and we shared this as all the campus pastors have experienced this, when somebody will say, "That's exactly what I needed to hear," and then we'll tell them, "We put this on the calendar a year and a half ago, and it was there for that particular Sunday at that particular time." And of course, that just speaks to the power of God's Word and the way He shapes it all. So
so I had a mentor who planned his sermons, just about a year in advance, and the question always came up when he got questions about his planning, his preparation process. What do you do for like the work of the Spirit? If He's going to change your plans at the last minute. And he was so used to that question that he retrieved one of his sermon preparation cards from 2001, where he had planned for 2001's sermons a year in advance. And the sermon after September 11th, the Sunday after September 11th, was, "What do you do when bad things happen?" He had planned that a year in advance. And it's just like, yes, the Spirit can lead you to pivot if you need to at the last minute, but He can also work through our preparation and line things up in ways that we just can't imagine.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm really glad you brought that up. This wasn't even planned, but it makes a good transition. Let's talk a little bit about how perhaps we can give some insight, some help to maybe those that are just starting out in preaching, some younger preachers. And I want to start, if you'll allow me to, by saying what not to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Because on that very note, I started preaching the Easter Sunday, the Sunday after Easter, 2001. And when September 11th happened, I was walking through the Beatitudes. And I just now started pastoring, just now started preaching, and September 11th happened, and I stayed with the Beatitudes, and I should have pivoted.
Yeah.
I didn't. The church was, it was a tiny country church in Amite, Louisiana, but that Sunday it was packed.
And people wanted to hear from the Lord. What is He going to say about this situation?
And I didn't. I stayed with it. And so one thing, on the opposite end of that, there's times when you need to pay attention to what's going on. Of course, I knew what was going on, but it just didn't hit. If I had to do that Sunday over again, I would do something totally different.
Yeah.
And so I could probably give another hour of things not to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As a preacher, but
yeah.
You touched on some things that younger preachers about finding their voice and that sort of thing earlier. What are some of the things that come to mind, John, that perhaps a younger preacher would benefit from hearing?
Yeah, I think it's really important to get reps and get as many reps as you can. So there might be younger preachers. There may be some young preachers who are the lead pastor and they're going to be preaching week in and week out. And so they're going to get reps. But you might have guys who want to be a preacher, but they're not in a role where they're preaching regularly. I would encourage them, get a small group of guys around you, pick a text and write like a short message on it and then preach to one another. And that leads to the second thing that I would say is get feedback. So one of the most important experiences that I had that shaped me early on was I had to sit through a weekly sermon review. So every Sunday night at the end of our day, the whole church staff that I was a part of gathered around, and we reviewed the sermon that had been preached with the preacher there.
On Sunday night?
On Sunday night, yep.
Oh.
And so whether I was preaching or it was somebody else, getting to be a part of a process like that where you're giving encouragement and you're giving constructive feedback, or you're receiving encouragement and receiving instructive feedback, that experience has shaped me as much as anything else. I can still remember to this day, because I tend to be more excitable, and you've probably experienced this. Most preachers probably have, where you've been sitting in a passage all week. You've been sitting with the Lord. You're really excited. And maybe you come out the gate hot and everyone's just staring at you like they just got there. They're just hearing from the Lord now and what he's saying. And I remember getting feedback where one of the other pastors on staff said, John, we're so encouraged to see how excited you are about the text, but we need you to bring us alongside of you in that. Don't run out ahead of us. Show us in the text why you're excited and lead us to that place that you are. But being in a context where I was getting regular feedback was so important to my growth as a preacher, because we all have areas that we need to grow, whether it's in our explanation of the text, whether it's in our understanding, whether it's in our ability to apply it or illustrate, whatever it is, there's going to be all sorts of areas that we need to grow, especially as young preachers. So getting feedback, whether it's from people in your church, as much as it might hurt, or a group of friends outside of your church where you can send them, a recording of your sermon and say, hey, I'm honestly looking for feedback here. I think that's so important, so crucial. What would you say to younger preachers?
It's very hard, but you're right. I heard someone say, I don't remember who this was, years and years ago, that it's so important to watch yourself, because if all your people are watching you and you're the only one that's not. So what does that say? And I still to this day, I can't stand watching myself, but it teaches you so much about preaching. So yes, getting feedback is critical. And I can't stress enough, if you're a young preacher, preach. The best way to get better at preaching is preaching.
That's right.
Preach and preach and preach. I love the small group I did. Never thought about that. Call the executive director of the Tennessee Baptist Mission Board. Call or whoever the person, wherever state you're in. Call them and say, "Are there any small churches looking for preachers? Can I go to the prison and preach?
That's right.
Is there a Sunday school class I can stand up but get as many reps as you can?" I would also say, and you touched on this earlier, John, so important. Find your voice and be you. It takes a long time. At least it did in me. Sometimes I still think I'm still trying to figure out what my preaching voice is, and it may change, over time. But it's wonderful that we have the internet available to listen to preachers and to learn from them. And I highly recommend learning from as many preachers as you can. The negative is, you're probably going to find one that you really like, and you want to be him. Yeah. And I know that happened to me, especially my first 6, 7, 8 years of ministry. One of the reasons I don't want to go back and listen to any of those sermons is because I know I would cringe, not just at the content probably, but I know I would be trying to sound just like this preacher I was trying to be like. Yeah. And he's already there. But if God,
and he's being himself.
Yes. Yeah. And if God calls John or Matt or whoever's listening to this to preach, be that person. Yeah. So, and it's freeing. It is so free. I'd also say, and along those same lines, you'll never be everybody's cup of tea. There's some people just aren't going to like your style.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You can't be all things to all people in that way as a preacher.
Yes.
Like, there are just going to be some people who don't prefer you.
And if you try to be that, you're gonna go mad.
Yeah.
You're gonna drive yourself crazy. You're gonna drive everybody else crazy. So be you and be comfortable in your own skin. Earlier you said something about preaching angry. When I was in Arkansas pastoring, I remember my music minister's parents came into town. And the next day I said to him, what'd your parents think about the service yesterday? And he goes, they said you preach mad.
Yeah. You may have been looking for like, I wonder what positive feedback they're going to give.
Exactly.
Me.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure I was fishing for some positive. They said you preach angry, and I remember being like, no, I don't. And I was angry in my response.
How dare you?
But one of the reasons was I was trying to be like this celebrity preacher that I had been spending so much time listening to, and so preach. I love get feedback. So important. Never stop getting feedback.
That's right.
And be yourself.
Yeah.
So those are some of the three biggies that come to my mind.
On that be yourself point, that's so good. I can even think of it, and I hesitate to give advice like this because everyone's different, but I cannot listen to anyone else preach the passage that I'm working on until I have finished my sermon, like writing it, because I will just get all out of whack.
Yep.
I still remember a couple years ago listening to a Tim Keller sermon, and you can't find anybody more different than me in the pulpit than someone like a Tim Keller in so many ways, but like intellectual, very philosophical, and that's just not me. And I remember listening to a sermon that he preached on. It was a text that I was working on, and I couldn't get his voice out of my head. And I remember preaching the sermon. I didn't use any of his content, but I listened to it later. I was like, that doesn't sound like me at all. That's weird. And so it's so important to develop that voice. But you do it, like you said, through preaching and preaching and preaching and preaching.
Yeah. No, I've never listened to somebody's sermon on that text and struggled. No, I'm just kidding. It's a real thing. And to your point, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I don't even want to listen to it on a Friday or Saturday after my sermon's done, because then I'm going to be like,
I know theirs is better than mine.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Oh man, is it too late for me to go back and change that?
Yeah. Well, John, I love your preaching, and I'm thrilled that God brought you here a little over a year ago. And from what I hear and observe, just God's using you in unique and incredible ways at the Church of Station Hill. So thank you for loving the text and the God of the text and wanting your people to do the same.
Likewise, I've listened to a number of your sermons since being here, and it's just so encouraging. Listen to you preach. It's so clear that you love the Lord, love your people, and you're trying to feed them God's word, and that's just so encouraging. So it's a joy to be laboring alongside of you.
Yeah. Praise the Lord. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Elevate Podcast. I'd love for you to join us this September for the Elevate Conference at Brentwood Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a one-day event designed to equip and encourage your entire team with role-specific breakouts, inspiring keynotes, and networking with church leaders from across the country. Register now at elevatechurchconference.com. You can find the link in today's show notes. We'll see you at the Elevate Conference on September 9th. Until next time.